The vibration of my cell phone jolted me awake. I reached for it, anticipating a message from my sister or perhaps one of my engineers in a different time zone. Instead, it was a solitary text. No greeting, no explanation, just this. Eleanor, after careful deliberation, we've decided to transition in a new direction. Your role is no longer necessary. Thank you for your contributions. Please ensure all system access is relinquished by close of business Monday. Management. I read it thrice, each time more slowly than the last. I wasn't dreaming. 23 years, countless hours, millions in annual earnings. And a venture I'd nurtured from a humble card table in a shared collaborative space, now severed with a text message on a Sunday morning. I should have been furious or heartbroken or at least stunned. But I wasn't, because somewhere deep within, I'd felt this shift approaching. Still, I took a breath and typed my reply with the same composed professionalism that had guided me through acquisitions, workforce reductions, investor disputes, and late-night code fixes. Wishing you all the best moving forward. I set my phone down and stared at the ceiling. My name is Eleanor Vance. At 57 years old, a Scorpio through and through, fiercely loyal yet capable of extreme transformation, I was the co-founder, and until this morning, the lead systems architect of ApexLink Systems, a mid-size software as a service, SaaS, provider headquartered in Austin. I raised my daughter through 2 recessions and 1 pandemic while growing this company from a self-funded concept into a $40 million operation. I didn't have investors back then. I didn't even have proper health insurance. What I had was a whiteboard, 3 laptops, and an idea that wouldn't let me sleep. And now I had a text message sent by Jackson Riley, a slick 32-year-old, likely a dominant Leo or a calculating Capricorn, who had joined us 6 years prior as an entry-level product manager and rapidly ascended the ranks. Too quickly. Jackson had charm, no doubt, and a Stanford MBA that made investors swoon. He'd been promoted to CEO just over a year ago after the board orchestrated my co-founder, Arthur's, early departure. I stayed on thinking I could adapt, but that was my first mistake. Thinking that fidelity held sway in a realm obsessed with innovation and youth. Back when ApexLink was just an idea, I was coding in my garage while my daughter napped on a second-hand couch. I'd built systems before for medical offices, real estate firms, even a few early .coms. But this time was different. This time I wanted to create an unbreachable system. Custom-built from the ground up, secure, scalable, elegant. And so I did. I architected the core system of what would later become ApexLink's flagship product, Secure Sync, a secure file sharing and collaboration platform used today by over 600 enterprise clients, including 3 financial institutions and 1 federal agency. The entire infrastructure was tiered, fortified, and strengthened by my own encryption framework, buried deep in the core, invisible to anyone who didn't know where to look. I never imagined I'd need a contingency protocol, but I built one anyway. I walked into my home office and fired up my private workstation. As the bespoke operating system hummed to life, a quiet welcome chime sounded, the one I'd hard-coded years ago. My digits glided across the keys, accessing the logs, monitoring the system's vital signs, still running flawlessly, still breathing, and still completely within my command. Jackson didn't know that. He thought I'd handed everything off. Thought he'd substituted my methods with fluid workflows and slick presentations. What he didn't realize was that ApexLink's entire infrastructure was still running on my code. Code that required periodic manual verification, silent keys, and encryption maps that only I possessed. Code I had encrypted using my proprietary protocol and scattered across 4 access nodes, 2 of which had been deactivated last month when he reorganized the system's team without my knowledge. I closed the terminal and sat back. The system wouldn't fail today or tomorrow, but in 11 days, the automatic renewal sequence for the core license keys would activate. And when that happened, unless someone entered the proper passphrase, the system would initiate protective shutdown. Not to destroy it, but to protect it from misuse, from unqualified personnel, from people like Jackson. It wasn't a trap. It was insurance. My phone buzzed again. Another message, this time from Chloe, one of the original engineers I had hired 15 years ago. It simply read, "Please tell me you saw the news. They've already deactivated your email access. They really think they can run this without you." I smiled just slightly. They could try, but the real question wasn't if ApexLink would break. It was when and whether I'd be willing to save it. Monday morning arrived crisper than anticipated. Austin's skies were gray, and so was my mood as I watched early risers stride past my house, while I sat with a mug of coffee I didn't remember making. My digital mailbox had been sealed overnight. My professional communication channels were dormant. After 2 decades, it was like I'd never existed. No farewell email, no transition meeting, no acknowledgement of what I had built, just silence. And somewhere in a corner office downtown, Jackson Riley was probably high-fiving someone over how seamless the transition had unfolded. I logged into my personal systems again. ApexLink servers continued their rhythmic purr, their activity logs flowed into my secure oversight dashboard. No signs of panic yet, but I knew the clock was ticking. 11 days. That's when the renewal protocol for ApexLink's primary authentication framework would attempt to interact with the updated security keys. And unless the system received the passphrase from an authorized administrator, an administrator they no longer had, it would trigger a system degradation. And degradation was not pleasant. Degradation meant clients would begin receiving failed certificate notifications. Not immediately, but incrementally. A slow erosion of confidence, access denials, login failures, synchronization interruptions. I hadn't designed it to punish. I had designed it to protect, but without the passphrase, the system would interpret the silence as unauthorized intrusion. It would restrict entry to confidential information, halt data syncing across dispersed servers, and require direct oversight, something only I knew how to perform. Not because I was trying to be indispensable, but because they never bothered to grasp. ApexLink had its first major data breach alarm. An external analytics module had introduced a weakness, and overnight client data was almost exposed. We intercepted it promptly, but it was a blunt awakening. Jackson wasn't even at the company then. It was me, my co-founder Arthur, and a handful of engineers doing 16-hour days trying to contain the damage. That week, I decided I'd build a system that didn't rely on memory or guesswork. A self-validating architecture with integrated contingency measures that accounted for human fallibility. Not if, but when. It took me 8 months. I re-engineered core components. I documented every piece on paper. I created a tangible access schema that only Arthur and I had access to. He stored his copy in a flame-resistant safe. Mine stayed in my safe. When Jackson joined, he never asked about the foundational systems. He brought in his advisors. They installed fresh analytics displays. They revamped the user interface, but they never addressed the fundamental framework. And you can't redesign a tree from the leaves. By noon Monday, the inquiries began. First, it was Brendan from payroll. "Hey, Eleanor. I know this is weird, but do you remember how the internal payment portal connects with the freelance worker ledger? I'm unable to access, and it said you oversee that platform." I paused. He seemed stressed, but not in a full panic yet. "I'm not with ApexLink anymore, Brendan," I said, calm but clear. "I was informed of my termination yesterday." "Oh, I didn't realize." He hesitated. "It's just we need access by end of day or no one gets paid." "That's troublesome." Another silence, then a soft, almost embarrassed voice. "Do you still have the emergency access code?" I didn't answer because he already knew. An hour later, Chloe called. She didn't bother with small talk. "They've disabled your distant access, but the system still identifies your digital signature as a primary administrator. You know that, right?" "I know," I replied. They didn't. I just watched Jackson in a meeting try to act like nothing's wrong, but the entry-level developers are in distress. Some recent system updates have already malfunctioned. I could hear typing in the background, probably from her personal setup. She'd always worked better outside the office. It's why I permitted her to conduct rollouts remotely when she was still a junior. She never forgot that. "Do you want me to fix it?" I asked. She didn't answer immediately. Then, "No, I want you to do what you think is right, but they're not ready for what's coming." That night, I pulled out a sturdy dark binder from the back of my closet. Inside were scribbled schematics, access records, time markers, the same documentation I'd proposed digitizing 3 times, each request declined. "Too entrenched," they'd stated. "We'll migrate all operations to cloud-based solutions." They never asked where the encryption protocols resided. They never asked who re-established the cryptographic salts semi-annually. They never even looked at the initial server blueprint, which still channeled through 2 of my dormant failover nodes. I flipped to the last page of the binder, a short line of code, my ultimate safety mechanism. A script that, when executed, wouldn't corrupt the system, but would bring it to a complete standstill, a pause, a core system advisory. This infrastructure was never meant to run without understanding. Please return to origin for reset. I closed the binder and locked it back into the safe. I had no intention of causing damage, but I wasn't going to shield them from their own missteps either. Not yet. On Wednesday morning, Chloe texted again. "Eleanor, it's starting. Multiple client systems failed the overnight sync. Jackson's blaming the IT team. You might want to check your logs." I refreshed the system. Server 4 had just ceased responding. 10 days left. Wednesday, 6:32 a.m. Chloe's message was short, but it struck like a thunderclap. "Eleanor, it's starting. Multiple client systems failed the overnight sync. Jackson's blaming the IT team. You might want to check your logs." I set down my coffee and slid into my home office chair. Server 4 silent. That node handled verification requests for 7 major clients, including Prosperity Bank, our oldest financial customer. The security certificate validation had failed twice overnight, just as I had predicted. Without manual override, the system was in degradation mode, cutting off synchronization and escalating logs to the contingency error log. Not a full shutdown, not yet. But the symptoms were showing, and they were only going to escalate. I opened a secondary monitoring screen and watched as warning indicators flashed across servers 3 and 7. Not critical, not total failure, but fault lines, evident and widening. They were already late in fixing it. By 10:17 a.m., I received a professional network message from one of the newer engineers, Daniel, a reserved yet proficient backend developer who joined 2 years ago. "Hi, Eleanor. I hope you're well. I know you're no longer with ApexLink, but I was wondering if you have any advice on the outdated authenticator within Secure Sync version 3. Our internal documentation references something called Integrity Handshake, but no one knows what it does." Integrity Handshake. They really didn't know. That was the connection validator I wrote in 2012 after a client certificate error led to a 3-hour synchronization disruption. It discreetly detected authentication discrepancies and initiated a deferred retry sequence via a secure test environment until the platform could securely reconcile the key divergence. Without it, the whole authentication sequence would freeze. ApexLink's architecture had evolved since then. But the crucial framework of that operation, the logic still ran on that silent script, buried deep, resilient, undisturbed for a decade. I didn't respond to Daniel. I needed to keep objective detachment. I'd given everything to that company. And now that it was disintegrating, part of me, the fiery scorpion sting, wanted to let it burn. But there were clients involved. People, businesses depending on access to their systems to process salaries, arrange deliveries, safeguard sensitive information. And I still cared. That was the hardest part. I still cared not about Jackson or the board or whatever excuse they'd give to cover this up later, but about the people I'd built this system for in the first place. Thursday, I went out for a walk. I needed space to think, fresh air, to remember who I was before I became redundant and antiquated. Near the neighborhood coffee shop, I ran into Mark, our previous director of deployments. He appeared startled, then contrite. Eleanor, wow, I wasn't expecting to run into you. I still reside here, Mark, I said gently. He nodded embarrassed. They're not handling it well. He admitted the shift. I mean, platforms are malfunctioning and well, you probably know that already. I've observed the indicators. He glanced around, then dropped his tone. Jackson's pretending everything's under control, but we had 5 client service escalations yesterday. The board of directors is inquiring. That made me pause. The board, he nodded. There was a private session this morning. Samuel Hayes from legal kept repeating that someone failed to ensure adequate transition documentation. Jackson's attributing blame to you. I had to chuckle softly, ruefully. Of course he is. That night I received another message. This time from a number I hadn't seen in years. Arthur, my former co-founder, the one who left when Jackson was named CEO, noticed the unfolding events. You okay? I'm fine. You still have access, don't you? They never rescinded the primary access credentials, only the surface-level administrative permissions. That was a mistake. Yes, I replied. A significant oversight. There was a pause before his final reply. What are you going to do? I didn't answer because I wasn't sure yet. Friday 3:04 p.m. 3 additional client systems faltered during automated deployments, certificate discrepancies, synchronization problems, inaccessible administrative panels. Client assistance was overwhelmed with inquiries, and all the engineers were frantically navigating with insufficient documentation, fumbling through a system never intended for blind operation. And still, no one called me, not Jackson, not the board, not one official acknowledgement of what was happening. Just the gradual disintegration of a system that had run smoothly for over a decade because someone understood each component's precise function, and that someone had been discarded with a brief message. On Saturday morning, I opened my email to find a subject line that made me straighten my posture. Crucial system rectification, plea from the governing board underneath, just one line. Miss Vance, would you be available for a discreet advisory session regarding ApexLink's core infrastructure? We are ready to provide remuneration. They were finally reaching out. The question now was, what would be the price for their salvation? Saturday, 9:12 a.m., the board's email sat unopened for a 60-second interval as I stared at the subject line, the phrases swirling in my just-awakening mind. Urgent system stabilization request. It wasn't from Jackson. It was from the board of directors' official address. I clicked it. Miss Vance, we are requesting your availability for a confidential consultation regarding ApexLink's core infrastructure. We believe your expertise is uniquely required to address specific pressing concerns that have arisen during the current system transition. We are prepared to offer compensation and work within your terms. Please let us know how you would prefer to proceed. There it was. No contrition, no reference to the dismissal, merely a transaction. I closed my eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. This wasn't just about code anymore. It was about legacy, about the ease with which expertise is dismissed and the significant cost incurred when that expertise proves indispensable. Still, I was not spiteful. I didn't want ApexLink to collapse. There were a multitude of talented individuals still employed there. People I had guided, championed, recruited, instructed, but I also wasn't returning with deference. Not this time. 1:44 p.m. I composed my reply. Each word meticulously selected. I am open to consultation under the following conditions. 1. Virtual access exclusively. No face-to-face engagements. 2nd, complete independence to conduct essential evaluations. 3rd, a formal contract confirming that any programming developed or counsel offered during this consultation retains my intellectual property rights. Licensed to ApexLink for this specific scenario alone. 4, a per diem consultation fee of $3,000 with a minimum 7-day retainer paid upfront. 5, I will not answer to Jackson Riley, nor will I participate in discussions he attends. I pressed send, then I waited. It took 42 minutes. The reply was short. Agreed. Login details will be provided by 3 o'clock this afternoon. Remittance confirmation enclosed. And just like that, I was re-engaged with the system I engineered, possessing the authority I should never have ceded. 3:05 p.m. remote access restored. Logs, protocols, contingency measures, everything was still there. It felt like re-entering a neglected homestead. Uncleaned, dust coating every surface. Crucial updates overlooked. Ancient warnings obscured by unopened notifications. They hadn't just failed to maintain it, they'd actively compromised it. Jackson's team had attempted to implement contemporary utilities, novel frameworks, and showy integrations without comprehending the foundational stability of the system. They'd corrupted interdependencies, eliminated vital verification pauses, and astonishingly deactivated the integrity handshake. I had to reverse the majority of their modifications just to begin identifying the underlying malfunctions. Sunday, 10:22 a.m. I had been working nonstop for 19 hours. I ate a nutrition bar at my desk and sipped chilled brew while reviewing the results of my first full system scan. The primary certificate chain had already activated 4 security lockout limits. The contingency servers were barely operational, but unless they were manually resynchronized, the entire platform would trigger the ultimate shutdown in less than a week. I addressed the immediate concerns, drafted a provisional script to stabilize the most critical servers, gaining precious time, but I held back from deploying the complete resolution, still pondering my inclination. Monday, 8:03 a.m., a new email came in this time from the board president, Victoria Sterling. Miss Vance, the stabilization efforts are demonstrating success. We're profoundly appreciative. I'd like to converse with you privately, unofficially if possible. I agreed. We scheduled an encrypted video conference for noon. 12:01 p.m. Victoria appeared on my screen, composed and self-possessed. I want to start by acknowledging that the manner of your dismissal was intolerable, she said immediately. We were unaware of the specific circumstances then. I've since examined the termination procedure, and I wish to extend a formal apology. I wasn't expecting that. Thank you, I said. That holds significance. She nodded. We now understand that Jackson forced your ousting under the pretext of modernization. He failed to reveal the extent of the company's continued dependence on your foundational architecture. I didn't respond. Eleanor, she continued, what would it take to bring you back? I paused. I'm not returning, I said plainly. I've secured an alternative position, one that recognizes my expertise without demanding I revalidate my capabilities. She sighed. Then I'll ask something else. Would you be willing to address the board this coming Friday? We're conducting an executive performance assessment. Your perspective would be invaluable. So, this was the direction this was taking. I'd known Jackson was losing control, but now it was confirmed. They were contemplating a potential leadership change, and I had just become the pivotal witness. Late Monday night, while finishing my report for the board, an internal chat notification appeared from a former colleague. Hey, just heard from someone inside. Jackson's in a panic. He knows you're behind the fix. He's scheming something. Something in my gut churned because the only thing more perilous than an overmatched CEO was one who grasped their predicament too late. Tuesday, 7:46 a.m., the Slack message still sat on my screen. Jackson's in a panic. He knows you're behind the fix. He's scheming something. I stared at it for a while. Jackson was many things. Rash, vulnerable, perilously confident. But I hadn't expected him to retaliate at this advanced stage. He must have realized the board was closing in. My consultancy contract had already been disseminated internally. The records indicated who had deployed the stabilization fixes. There was no further concealment, but that didn't mean he wouldn't try. At 9:08 a.m., my phone rang, unidentified number. I allowed it to divert to voicemail. Then it rang again and again. By the fourth call, I answered. Eleanor, his voice was subdued, composed. I hadn't heard it since the day of my dismissal. Jackson, I said, I think we need to address the tension. I said nothing. You've proven your stance, he continued. You've demonstrated your enduring worth. You've recalled your lasting impact to everyone. His tone soured on the last word. I'm not attempting to prove anything, I replied calmly. I was requested to rectify a system your team struggled with. I fulfilled that. You were also invited to address the board Friday. So, he knew, that didn't surprise me. What do you intend to disclose? He asked. That varies, I said. What are you apprehensive I'll reveal? There was a pause. Then the facade wavered slightly. I'm asking for a chance to rectify this. Let's prevent this from escalating uncontrollably. I nearly chuckled. Not out of malice, but from the stark irony. Now he wanted to mend relations. After disregarding my contributions, after labeling me redundant and antiquated, after severing ties with a solitary text, as if I were a discarded supplier. Jackson, I said steadily, you've had every opportunity to govern with probity. Instead, you deceived, concealed your errors, and almost jeopardized a product vital to hundreds of businesses. This isn't escalating. This is consequences. I'm willing to offer an arrangement. That captured my interest, though not in the manner he anticipated. I'm attentive, I said, crossing my arms. You rejoin as a systems consultant. A title of your choosing, complete independence, executive-level remuneration. We'll present this to the board collectively as a display of solidarity. Solidarity? I almost appreciated the sheer nerve. Jackson, I said slowly, you want me to preserve your position, not the enterprise. He made no denial. Your name still carries weight here, he said instead. Don't discard your entire creation simply to make a statement. It was insidious manipulation disguised as reason, as devotion, as if I was the one being petty. I took a breath. I'm not discarding anything. I'm safeguarding the essential components. And if that means conveying the truth to the board, then so be it. He sighed deeply. You know they'll dismiss me. I know they'll make the decision that best serves ApexLink. And I terminated the conversation. Wednesday 4:20 p.m. Chloe called. He's terrified, she said. Convened a meeting with 3 of us today and attempted to portray the system's breakdown as unrelated to his actions. Attributed blame to archaic limitations and deficient documentation. Typical evasion, I muttered. Eleanor, she said softly, you know you're going to be the determining factor, right? I'm not casting a vote, I replied. I'm simply presenting the facts. Occasionally, those are synonymous. I didn't respond because she was right. Thursday, I spent most of the day finalizing the official record, every fix I'd implemented, every workaround I'd rectified, every defect I'd linked to Jackson's choices. It was not vindictive. It was merely precise. The facts, a chronology, the truth. And as I finished assembling the material for my presentation, I added one final line in the conclusion. No infrastructure collapses without forewarning. Yet, when leadership chooses willful ignorance, even the most robust systems will falter. Friday morning, I entered the executive boardroom at ApexLink for the first time in 89 days. 11 people sat around the gleaming table. Jackson was already there. He avoided my gaze. Victoria Sterling coughed discreetly and said, Miss Vance, we're prepared for your testimony. I unfolded my dossier. The chamber grew hushed and I commenced. Friday, 9:03 a.m., the boardroom was chillier than I recalled. Opaque glass walls, burnished metal seating, the contemporary aesthetic Jackson had championed during the recent refurbishment. Greater flair, diminished depth, a flawless analogy. I positioned myself at the table's apex, my notes laid out. 11 board members looked back at me, some intrigued, some anxious, a few reserved. Jackson sat halfway down the left side, attire impeccable, expression inscrutable. He didn't hold my gaze. Victoria Sterling gave a brief nod. Miss Vance, the podium is yours. I rectified my posture and began. I joined ApexLink 23 years ago, when this venture was merely a concept scrawled on a napkin in a rented collaborative workspace. I authored the initial lines of code that ultimately formed our flagship product, Secure Sync. I constructed the cryptographic framework that safeguarded our clients' data and preserved our standing. Not a soul intervened. Even Jackson sat still, his jaw tightened. For years, I operated discreetly, guiding teams, resolving complications, compiling records, remedying vulnerabilities before they escalated into threats. I labored late on weekends and through holidays because I had faith in our creation. I turned a sheet. In March of this year, abruptly, without warning or deliberation, I was dismissed from my role via a brief text message. The stated justification claimed my methodologies were antiquated and irrelevant. A few members stirred uneasily. What ensued, I proceeded, was a comprehensive collapse of the company's paramount infrastructure. Not due to flawed code, but because no one deigned to comprehend the bedrock upon which they stood. I tapped the document before me. 3 vital protocols were modified untested. Certificate renewal processes were overlooked. System authentications were diverted through unsecure modules. Documentation was either superseded or entirely erased. I paused, and when the entire system began to crumble, the company sought my return. Still no reaction from Jackson. I consented to assist, not for self-interest, nor for vindication, but because I believe in the individuals still employed here, the clients dependent on our systems, and the reputation we collectively established. I raised my gaze. But I will not aid in rebuilding an entity that declines to learn from its errors. Victoria cleared her throat. Miss Vance, are you stating you won't proceed with your advisory role? I've fulfilled my agreement, I said. The system is stable, fully functional. I've furnished comprehensive documentation to avert future occurrences, but I'm not staying because I'm no longer inclined to work for an organization that views experience as a detriment. Jackson finally spoke. That's ironic, coming from someone who deliberately withheld documentation for portions of the system. I looked at him, composed, deliberate. I presented 3 distinct proposals to enhance documentation protocols, I replied. All were dismissed. I volunteered to instruct newer engineers. The sessions were revoked. I expressed apprehension regarding the knowledge deficit 6 months prior in an email dispatched to you and 3 other individuals present. That correspondence was never recognized. I allowed that statement to resonate. If anyone hindered the system's full comprehension, it was the leadership that deemed anything beyond their understanding insignificant. Quietude. Then James Barton, the board member most aligned with Jackson, inclined forward. Eleanor, he said, what do you advise for progression? I did not falter. Employ individuals who possess the foresight to inquire, who value foundational knowledge equally with groundbreaking innovation, establish a genuine transition framework, encourage collaborative learning, and never again presume that age equates to obsolescence. Victoria nodded. Thank you, she said. We value your candor. I closed my dossier and withdrew. I was finished. Saturday 11:24 a.m. the call originated from Victoria. Jackson has tendered his resignation, she said. The board voted in full agreement to commence an executive transition. We've asked Samuel to assume the role of interim CEO. I said nothing. I felt no triumph. I simply felt liberated. There's one additional matter, Victoria continued. The board has consented to adopt your documentation framework. They're naming it the Foundational Protocol. We hope you'll permit us to credit it to your name. I offered a faint smile. That's acceptable, I said. Thank you. 2 weeks later, I started my new role at Quantum Shield Inc., a cybersecurity enterprise renowned for prizing profound expertise over superficial allure. My team comprised engineers in their 20s and 50s collaborating, sharing perspectives and mutual regard. During my orientation, my new manager said something I hadn't heard in years. You're not here to validate yourself, Eleanor. You're here because you've already excelled. 3 months later, I received a modest package delivered via post from an unidentified source. Inside was a personally inscribed card. a single line encapsulating all unspoken sentiments during your tenure. Thank you. No signature, merely a folded ApexLink Systems note card and a USB drive marked Arthur's Archive. Foundation endures. I leaned back in my seat, gazing out the window. Perhaps it was the Scorpio in me, always planning, always seeking ultimate control, but also understanding the power of release when the time is right. Sometimes the ultimate vindication isn't dominance, but relinquishing control on your own terms. And understanding that the very essence they sought to discard was the linchpin sustaining their entire operation.